Welcome to Her Path to Success, brought to you by the Arab American Women's Business Council. My name is Farah Harb, and I'm the Vice President for this year. And we've been doing a series called Women of Influence, talking about taking unconventional passions and turning them into businesses. But something that I would ask you that's very important is, what's your brand? Do you even know what it is, and have you thought of it before? It's something that's pretty important when you're talking about being an influencer or doing anything from your day-to-day. So today, we have joining us the expert in personal branding, Farah Harb.
Hello, my name is Farah Harb, and I am with the Ford Motor Company Fund. I manage education programs, and part-time I teach at the University of Michigan Dearborn. My course is career development, and part of that is your personal brand.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And telling us a little bit more about it. So what is personal branding? Why is it important? And more importantly, why do I even need it?
Yeah. So your personal brand is really what people think of you when you're not in the room. And so within 7 seconds, you've made an impression. And so you could either have a good impression, or you made a bad impression, or you've left no impression because you really didn't stand out at all. And for those of you that are trying to search into your career and what you want to do, or meeting with new executives, whatever the case may be in your career or your personal life, your brand really represents who you are, again, when you're not in the room. And so what is that to people?
So it's very important to know how people perceive you and how you want to be perceived. So it's important, it sounds like, because it's just like any brand. It's how you be remembered.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. So I always tell people, just like if I said the best phone, some people might say Android, some people might say iPhone, but there's a brand there that resonates with that topic, or the best soda or pop. And
it's recognizable.
Exactly, Pepsi or Cola or Coke. And so with this, it's especially if you're career searching, and somebody said, I'm looking for someone that's a really strong problem solver. If you stood out to be that strong problem solver and that's your brand, they're going to remember that person. And so that's why that's really important, so that you stand out outside of hundreds of different people.
That's really true. And even when you're talking about influencing, right? So if you want to make an impact on people, you want to be known for making an impact. So it's kind of, you start with your personal brand, how you want to be perceived and remembered, and then you work backwards to kind of how you achieve that. Can you tell us a little bit more about how we achieve it and how do we decide what our personal brand is?
Of course. And so with your personal brand, really two questions you want to ask yourself is, what value do you bring, and what do you want it to be? So really kind of thinking about it first internally, and it shouldn't be this list of like 10 different characteristics, really 2 to 3 strong points that you want to say, okay, this is who I am. And the second question is, kind of resonating with that too, is what exact concepts or traits or characteristics are those things that you want to be? And so it's, I'm very good at all of these great things, but what does that mean? And so really narrowing it down into that. And to do so, you can ask your friends and family, right? It's the best way. So if you told somebody, tell me what you think of me, and they say, well, I think you are 1, 2, and 3, and you're like, oh, I don't want that to be my brand, then you really need to work on how you are executing your brand, and what are you saying, or how are you saying it, because 93% of the time, communication is nonverbal. And so it's how you could be saying it, and the tone that you're saying it, or just the movements that you're making.
It's your body language.
Yeah, your body language.
I think we don't even think about our body language and what it says about us.
Yep.
So that's interesting to note, that it's not only
what
characteristics, it's what you say and how you say it.
Yep.
Interesting.
So asking people is the best way to do so. People that know you, though. And and so getting that response from them really helps you identify and resonate with what is that brand that you have, and is that what you want it to be? Or do you need to kind of tweak that a little bit to really fit who you want, or what you want your brand to be?
Right. And something that I would add is ask people that are going to be brutally honest with you too. Not people that are like your mom and she's going to be like, oh, you're lovable and you're just the best person in the world. You're not going to be able to improve much there.
Yeah. And even friends in the professional world too, because they really get to see you in that workspace. And I think at home with our family, sometimes we're a little bit more casual, and we handle things a little differently. But I think in the professional world, it's really standing out in terms of who you are and what you're representing when you're in meetings and so forth. It's really important. And just remembering that no matter who you meet, if it's the front desk receptionist to the CEO of a company, everyone is thinking something. And so remembering that, because I think people forget that sometimes.
Right.
You've left an impression on everyone.
Right. And you never know what connection you make is going to turn into something even bigger in the future. right? You could be out networking and meet with a bunch of different people, and you've made an impression on somebody that's going to help you out in ways you probably didn't even think of, right? So it's make a good impression always from anybody you meet.
Yeah.
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
How do we go about, so okay, I have my qualities, right? I've defined this is what I want my personal brand to be. How do I go about now making that a reality?
Yep. So the next step really is, okay, now this is who I want, this is what I want to represent me, but really thinking of it in kind of 3 different pillars, I would say. So first, it would be kind of your persona.
Okay.
So what represents you, what makes that, you, really. And then the superpowers. So what makes you different, right? So even as though you're coming up with these like 3 characteristics that are very strong in terms of the traits that you have, what examples or what situations make you stand out with having that strong trait or characteristic or concept or whatever it is that really represents you? How do you prove that? Right, so thinking about that and making that stand out, and the third one kind of resonates with the second one also, is your personal story. And how does that fit? And so with a longer journey, how does your brand kind of represent you throughout that process, and really thinking how that all fits together. So what I always tell people is draw a picture or write it down. I'm not very creative and artistic, so I would not draw, but I might write some words down in different colors. And so in my class, my students are drawing and they're writing and they present their concepts in very different ways. And it helps people because you really, once you write it down on paper, it's real instead of just thinking it to yourself.
Right.
And so when you write it down, you start to believe this is really who I am, and how do I prove that, right? And so I can't just say I'm a problem solver. Thinking about what value did you bring to become that strong problem solver, and having that story ready, so that if you are interviewing and they say what's a strength of yours, and you say I'm a strong problem solver, you want to show how instead of just saying it. I need to believe it. Representing that.
Interesting, and I think it also holds accountability.
Yeah.
Right, and it's the more you think about this is my personal brand, and the more you're actively trying to achieve that, it becomes second nature. And you're also holding yourself accountable in the sense of you think about it more consciously.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting to say, and I like the idea of finding your own way to do that, right? Because it's about personal branding too. I wouldn't be able to draw.
Yeah.
I would make a list.
Yeah.
I'll make you the best list you need, right?
But only 2 to 3, so you don't want to have way too many characteristics because you get really lost. Your brand really needs to be a few things. So one is persistent. You need to have the same brand. You don't want to just keep changing it. The other one is memorable. And so you want it to be remembered, and so that value that you bring, people will remember what you're talking about versus just saying, I'm a good problem solver. That's cool, but really adding that value to it. And relatable, so knowing who you're talking about or talking to, knowing who you're talking to will allow you to highlight either one of your 3, strong brand concepts or traits, or all 3, but it really knowing who you're talking to, and does it make sense to really highlight all of them or one of them that represents you. And just, again, being consistent and persistent with it.
I like that. So something that I'm thinking of, it's like, okay, I have everything defined. I know what I want to be. I can talk about it, but how do we live it? How do we show our personal brand? So if I'm not in an interview, for example, and let's say I'm a public speaker, or I'm selling a product, but I also want to present myself in the best possible light. How do you live it? How do you live your personal brand without having to tell people I'm 1, 2, 3?
Yep. So once you identify what it is, it becomes a part of you. So let's say you are a sales representative, but you do a lot of public speaking. Your personal brand might really be a strong communicator. And so that really will stand out as you talk in meetings, you meet new people, you may be pitching an idea at work, but the way you communicate is very effective. And so people might think to themselves, wow, when she speaks, she sounds so good. Like, I wish I could sound like that in a meeting. But that really comes from your roles in what you do. And again, your brand shouldn't be the position that you have. It's traits or characteristics that represent you.
Good point.
So remembering that. For example, I teach my classes or I speak at events in front of thousands of people. But part of my brand is I want to be not only a strong communicator, but motivating when I speak. And so when I'm out and speaking, I'm always trying to relate to my audience. I'm trying to remember, who am I talking to? How does it make sense? Am I losing them? How do I engage them again? And focusing on that. And some people come back and say, I love the way you speak. I'm like, that's my brand, it's being represented. And again, it's not my position that's speaking about it, speaking to it. It's what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And so you work at it. It takes work. Again, it's that value piece. You have to build value to really own the brand.
Okay.
So it's not just saying, I want to be X. It's what are you now? And maybe it's not really strong just yet, but you got to work then towards it.
Right. It's what are you doing to get where you want to be?
Yep.
So I think another key part of that is being true to yourself and knowing what are your strengths and what are you good at. And if I'm not so good at it, how can I get better? If I want to be defined by this, right? So if you're not a good public speaker, you want to take a couple steps back and say, how can I become a better speaker? Is there training? Is there practice? What can I do to become more motivating?
Yeah. And really take the time to focus on what is it, is it a class? Is it, being the first person in a meeting to present instead of waiting till the end because you're shying away from it? But there are ways that you really need to think about, how do I get better at it? And owning that, like you said, and that's important.
So who's personal branding for? Is it just for somebody going on an interview or someone who wants to be a public speaker? Who can benefit from knowing their personal brand?
Everyone. I think we've all been in situations sometimes where, whether it's professional or not, someone has said, oh, I thought that person was like X, and you're offended. Because it's like, well, why would they think that?
Right.
And then you're mad at the person, or you're kind of, just upset that they would think that. But we have to go back and think, what did you do for them to think that of you? Or what did you say and how did you say it for them to think that of you? And take ownership over that and believe that maybe it was something we did or we said, and again, our brand wasn't being well represented. And I think we've all been in that situation at some point in time. We're misunderstood, and I think it's just the way that it's coming off. And so just keeping that in mind in terms of how do I better just kind of introduce myself to people or communicate certain things. Some of us still communicate differently and take in information differently. And so just understanding, again, your audience and how do you want to be represented, and just remembering that.
Well, that makes sense. Better first impressions.
Yeah.
Right? Because how many times do we meet someone and we think, man, I could have made a better first impression. That's not how I am. Or I misrepresented myself because I was nervous or not prepared or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So being prepared and knowing what your personal brand is leads you to go in to any event, situation, personal or professional, and be more well prepared.
Yep.
And
feeling confident.
Yeah, there you go. It leads to confidence.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And it really does make a difference. And you'll see, once you've developed your personal brand, we'd love to hear back about it if we can.
Yes.
But truly, as I developed mine, and I didn't start thinking about it till I was in my 20s, and a few years ago I was at a meeting with a bunch of health professionals. I do nothing in the health field, and I was the youngest person in the room, and I thought, what am I doing here? But I spoke out about something that I had an opinion on, and by the end of it, and I spoke actually about branding, we were talking about the company's brand, and I had a lady come over and say, when you first got here, I thought, what is she doing here? But by the end of the meeting, wow, and you come off as, and she described what she thought my brand was to her.
Right.
And I thought that was so interesting because then, I had follow-up and people coming to talk to me, and I was really intimidated going into the room. But knowing my brand, knowing what I have to offer, I felt confident. And whether or not I knew what they were talking about or I didn't, at some point I was able to relate to it and speak to it because of the way I communicate. And so that was my brand coming out.
And I think another thing that's also important is to note that you're in that room for a reason. Somebody thought you deserved to be in that room, and they brought you in for your expertise. So knowing that going into a situation that I was asked here for a specific reason makes a big difference and helps boost your confidence even more.
Yep. Especially with interviews. This isn't just for people going in interviews, but people interview, they get really nervous and they start to think, I'm not going to get the job. And I always say, if you walk in the room thinking you're not going to get the job, then you won't, because you don't even believe in yourself.
Right.
But you made it past the resume screening, and so you got that interview for a reason. So believing, whether or not you believe you really deserve it, but believing that I own that seat right now, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this chance, and I'm good for this position. And believing in yourself, that's even part of your brand too. Is being confident. Whether or not that's one of your 3 bullet points. But always believing in yourself. But building your brand will help you do that.
I agree.
Yeah.
And something that we would leave you with is a challenge. We would challenge you to go ask 3 people, personal and professional, and ask them to give you 3 characteristics of how they would define you. And I think it's a great exercise because you'll learn a lot about how people are perceiving you, and then you can kind of take that back and say, okay, is this what I think I'm showing off to the world? Is this how I think I'm representing myself? And then work from there. You might be surprised at what you hear.
Yep. Let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, we're always available to help out in any way we can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.